Hi, Jatan. Thank you so much for helping my project. I think we have a lot in common. We're both focused on the moon. But before getting into that, can you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jatan Mehta and I am an independent space writer based out of India. I primarily write for the Planetary Society as the contributing editor on planetary exploration and related things, all things space science, space exploration missions, etc. And I also self-publish a newsletter called Moon Monday. It's a weekly newsletter covering all global lunar exploration, science, and commercial developments from across the globe. So, yeah, pretty much from everything from Artemis to Chandrayaan to China's Changi missions and everything in between.
What got you interested in the moon to begin with?
Oh, well, it started primarily. I mean, I was always interested in science and space exploration as a whole, but my during my graduate days, I was more interested in astrophysics because that's what I was majoring in, and so my interest primarily lied outside the solar system. But it was back in 2018 and 2019 when I started working at a space company in India who were building things for the moon. And that is what got my interest more towards the moon compared to previous years. And that was basically it. So that's when I understood that when planetary science is very different from astrophysics, in that astrophysics is mostly an observational science, whereas in planetary science, you could send actual physical spacecraft to destinations and take, ground measurements. So in that sense, and at the same time, it is still very fundamental. So knowing how planets form, which by the way, the moon is essential to, like knowing the moon's untouched nature, like the airless nature of the moon and lack of active geology, anything like Earth's, makes it a very good candidate to understand and the nearest candidate to us to understand how planets at large form and evolve. So not just the moon itself, right? So doing planetary science and understanding the importance of the moon really got me interested in the idea that, planetary science can answer so many fundamental questions about our existence, our origin, the evolution of our solar system, and as a direct implication of that, many more solar systems across the universe. And all of it is in some way or the other tied to the moon, which we can just, see in the sky very casually. But yeah, so that's and it's something like, for example, when because of pollution and other factors, we are not able to see the night sky as our ancestors could, but we can still see the moon as our ancestors could, right? And uh, even if the star is going starless, unfortunately, in many developed areas of the world, the moon is still there. And if we keep exploring the moon as a whole, which we are thankfully doing now after a long, long gap, then there is some hope about, extending and advancing science and our future along with it.
But has your interest in space always been there? Or do you remember a point when, like, maybe it was really when you were young, or saw a teacher or a parent or a friend? Do you remember that point where you're like, space exists and I think I might want to find out more?
Yeah, so it was actually my school, and in the most unconventional way possible. Basically, what my school did was they used to omit certain chapters for some reason, and they ended up these chapters from the science textbook that were omitted were for some reason always related to space exploration, universe. The chapters used to be titled the universe or something. So they did this 3 years in a row, and this is when I was in my sixth grade, starting with my sixth grade. So by the time I was in my eighth grade and 13 in terms of age, I was just curious at that point as to what they were omitting, like why they were omitting something all the time. So curiosity got the better out of me, and I just read the chapter by myself. And I was just hooked. I mean, it was on the solar system, and it had all the uh, definitions of planets and what they are like, and what is a gas giant, and what are terrestrial worlds, and so on and so forth, and the moons of Jupiter, um, and so on. So all of that was just staggering, like the sheer variety of uh, like planets that we have and moons that we have in our own solar system. And that as a kid, that was so fascinating that it never went away. And that was basically the start of the how I got interested in space.
That is a curious story. Way to kind of get students hooked is to kind of
Yeah,
hide something from them.
yeah. Very unconventional.
Um, were any of your classmates or friends also hooked in a similar way?
Well, unfortunately not. They were just happy they didn't have to study yet another chapter. So
I heard one person said education's the one product that the customer is happier the less you give to them of it.
yeah, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Um, well, how did Moon Mondays come about? I mean, do you
Hmm.
remember when you created that project?
Yeah, so this is back in um, late 2019, around October, when I started having the idea of Moon Monday. I was always, as I said, like uh, the uh, because of the 2 years before that point, I was very interested in the moon and lunar exploration. And since the world as a whole was getting their interest in the moon was getting revitalized, no matter which country you talk about. And for some countries, it was getting they were getting interested in the moon for the very first time, like South Korea, for example. And so that was very like exciting and energetic. So there was momentum building up for moon exploration, and since I was very interested, so I was tracking the updates for myself. So I was trying to see, okay, what happened in the last week, and now what is happening now, what will happen next, and who else is building for the moon, and new science are we going to get out of it, and so on. So I would track some papers, sometimes get in touch with lunar scientists, and ask them questions about what they had just published, and so on. So then I thought at some point, why don't I aggregate all of these things, which I'm currently passively doing for myself. But since people are like, since there is a re-interest in the moon, probably people would be interested. But I did not think there would be many people who would be interested in that. So I asked around a few folks in the space industry, writing all sorts of things and researchers and so on, that if I were to do something like Moon Monday and collect all the aggregate all the exploration, science, commercial developments from every week. Would that be something you would like to read? And is that something that would get you excited, or you would benefit from the perspective of your job, for example? And the the responses were mixed mostly because most people thought that there would not be so much happening every week for me to cover as a 1,000 word plus newsletter. And it's not just them, even I thought that, for as a matter of fact, because until that point I was just reading, right? I was not actually putting it into a document and seeing for myself, or what's the span of the updates that has been accumulated in the last week. um, so even I thought that, there would not be significant amount of news every week. So maybe I should do it a bi-weekly or a monthly or something like that. But at the same time, people were like, yeah, like as soon as the pace of updates increase, this is something that they would like, and no one else is doing anything like that, even now, in fact. So I thought, okay, let's give it a shot anyway. The first four issues of Moon Monday were a trial, and I basically started in November 2019, and I sent it out to a bunch of people, the same bunch of people I talked to gather their feedback. So it was a soft launch. It was still public. I mean, anyone could read that, but the response turned out to be overwhelmingly positive. The initial response, and even me, like even I was shocked at the amount of updates I could find if I looked for it. And since then the updates have only increased. Like now I'm at a point where I have to choose what I need to omit from the newsletter, because I can't send a 2000 word newsletter to people all the time, right? So so I have to choose now what to omit. So we absolutely have a plethora of updates in lunar exploration. It was just a matter of seeing it for oneself by doing it. So I'm really glad I did that.
Do you know when my project started?
No.
December of 2019. So,
Oh wow. Wow. Great. Nice. So what did you think about, like, when you were starting the project?
well, we had Artemis Day over there at the McCold facility where, the core stage was complete. And
Hmm.
NASA had like this new associate administrator called Doug Laverio, who had like that lapel pin where he was counting down the days, the end of 2024, and going around NASA selecting like the hero of the day. Um, and that really triggered the idea of having this project where I would go and talk to everyday people. My plan was to talk to non-space people, actually, people at Starbucks and, at the mall and places like this. And then COVID hit, so I had to open it up to doing it online. And then I started thinking, looking at this project several decades from now and watching interviews of pretty much most of them going, did you know we're going to the moon? No. What do you think about it? Oh, that's cool. Or don't know why they're doing that, or stuff like that. And, having the space view missing, I think would have been a very, very bad thing. But anyway, so that's when the project started. And I really had no great grand designs for the project other than at the time I was working from home for like 2 years, and I thought it would get me out of the house to talk to people. Um, but now everybody works from home, so saying that's not as meaningful as it was 2 years ago.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's a very uh like when I first came across your project, essentially when you started reading Moon Monday and I got to know about you, and I came to know about the project. I was really uh I was thinking, yeah, that makes sense, because when we had Apollo, no one has documented such a vast you know uh pond of experience and thoughts and all the things that were there before the uh, moon landings happened. And this time in the modern day and age, we have a much better opportunity. Also, like, you can relatively much easily reach out to people and tap in for their thoughts. And yeah, it's really like interesting also to know the thoughts of people. Like in some of your videos, there are people mentioning, how this has been going on since a long time, the urge to go back. And so to finally start to see pieces of it happen is really exciting. So yeah, good luck for it.
Well, would it surprise you that of the non-space people that I randomly ask, like at the coffee shop, at the mall, at the airport, that only about 20% of them know that we're going to the moon?
Hmm. No, it wouldn't surprise me actually, because uh, I mean, space, at least growing up from the people I've interacted with over here, and that's a fair amount of them. Most of them do not know or care about space exploration or science in general, for that matter. So science, the penetration of scientific results and scientific ambitions to the larger public has always been um, um, low. So in fact, I would say I'm surprised that the number is even 20%. And I'd probably attribute that to the fact that you sampled people in the US. If you had probably sampled people in India, I would say the number could have probably been something around 10% at best. So yeah.
And a lot of it's sampling bias in another way too. You go up to people and say, "Hey, can I talk to you about us going back to the moon?" A lot of people say no, and so I don't even get to know if they know or not. So
Right.
obviously, the people that say yes, either they're already kind of somewhat excited about it, or willing to talk about it, or completely against it. It's something.
Right.
So what do you think? I mean, is this a concern that people don't know?
Well, yes, partially yes, because I mean, but at the same time, I think it's inevitable in the sense that science is progressing really, really fast in all of its domains, and space exploration is technically a part of that. So that's also progressing very fast in multiple domains, and there are different niches of research being created all the time, and people spend entire lives in one niche of a scientific domain and so on. So as the our knowledge, scientific knowledge base expands, there is more and more uh, technicality to knowing new things as opposed to the ones before. And as a result of that, and if you lack science communicators, which we do at large, so it is very natural that most of those results will not trickle down to the larger public, and they would not. And even if it does, it might be like a one-off thing. Like for example, the recently released James Webb Space Telescope images, they got too much attention compared to any other space exploration achievement in the recent past. I mean, it's a good thing, obviously, but what I'm trying to say is the JWST images reached far more people than anything else has reached in the last year or two. So even if when you consider that, and after a year or two, when something else happens in space exploration, let's say, most people will only have a memory of JWST and seeing those 5 images and nothing else, right? So their exposure to space is going to be limited, and at best it can be accounted by the most biggest headlines that penetrated the deepest, right? So it is a concern, but at the same time, I think the from my perspective as a writer, and that's partly that's effectively the reason why I became a science writer and science communicator is I had a choice between after completing my master's, I had a choice between going into research, doing a PhD, and the same old drill, or writing about science and communicating. Until that point, I was sort of doing a little bit of both, and I enjoyed both of those things. But I think I enjoyed writing more relative to doing research. And at some point, I just realized, there are more scientists than science communicators, and that's a fact. And and we need far more science communicators to bridge the gap between the results that science is producing, its implications, and so on, to the larger population. And since my interest is in space, I can become a science communicator within the space domain. So that was my initial uh, um, impetus to do science writing, and that's why I'm doing it. So yeah, I absolutely think it is something to worry about, but at the same time, it can't be solved unless and until there is uh, some large scale support for enabling science communicators, wherein people like me or anyone else for that matter who is in a similar domain are not um, going solo on their efforts to communicate science. So, for example, if I'm writing about Indian space missions, I it would be a lot better if I had a higher level of default support within the system. When I say default support, I do not mean the government or any of its entities directly supporting me. What I mean is uh, for example, the Indian Space Organization understanding uh, why outreach is valuable, which in the case of ISRO is not that. If you have followed, ISRO is not as open an organization as NASA is, for example. So it's fairly opaque, and we barely get to know anything about the mission, um, unless it's actually happening. And even then, the information bits are very tightly controlled. So that's what I mean by support. Like, for example, if I'm writing about a NASA mission, I have like a sea of web published web material to go through before I can even think about contacting a human for getting even more insight on the mission. But in the case of something like Indian space missions, you have a handful of pages at best to work with, and then you have to figure your way out of it. So it's a systemic problem, basically. So it's a very long way of saying it's a systemic problem.
Um, so we talked a lot about, you communicating about the moon and about Artemis and about all these moon activities. But I never asked you the question, what do you think about it? Us going back to the moon.
Awesome, like amazing. In fact, I used to always be sad that growing up, I used to be very sad that I was born so late. I mean, Apollo happened like years, decades ago, and I did not get to live that moment. When like arguably one of the biggest achievements of humans as a species. Uh, and I always used to pester my parents and uncles and anyone I could find about what was it like when you were a child, but the humans were landing on the moon, and what did you feel, what was the atmosphere and so on. But obviously the recollections were faint. So I used to be sad, but then now that Artemis is happening, and soon China is also intending to follow up very soon after. Uh, I think it's awesome because we can live the moment of landing humans on the moon again as a species, and this time in a setting where there are far better mass communication tools and richer audio visual tools available at our disposal. So we will get to see the moon landing in exquisite detail. We will get to see them doing, geology on the moon in far better detail than the videos of Apollo astronauts, which we do have and are amazing in themselves, and so on. But at the same time, there's another element to it. Like, obviously, human landing is a fascination of its own. Like, landing humans on any planetary body is a fascination in its own right. But at the same time, there's another aspect to this global renewed interest that I find uh, just as important. And that is partially why I chose Moon Monday to be representing all the updates from the globe. It doesn't, for example, it doesn't matter if South Korea is sending their first lunar orbiter this year, right? In fact, the launch is in August, and it doesn't make the scale of it any less, because I remember that when I was growing up 10 years, sorry, in 2008, when Chandrayaan 1 launched, when India launched their first lunar orbiter. So it was South Korea is about to go through the same moment that we had. And when Chandrayaan 1 launched for the moon, I remember people around me suddenly getting interested in space, as opposed to their usual interest, which is either low or non-existent. Because it was an Indian mission, Indian publications also carried the news further and deeper, and there was some sense of identity, a common identity, because it was India, who was sending a spacecraft to the moon. The Indians at large could relate to that better than other missions going there, and the same applied to me also. I was just, I think, 14 years old at that point, and I was stoked about the fact that India is sending a mission to the moon as a kid. And then a few years later, the discoveries started coming in, and one of them was obviously the discovery of water on the moon, which was a huge deal. And that is partly the reason why what catalyzed these modern plans that we are talking about. So when India discovered water on the moon, that was another proud moment for all of us. And I, as a kid, thought it was very inspiring for me that, okay, a country like India who has a relatively very young space exploration program compared to, NASA or the Russians, we could still contribute significantly to the world and to science and space exploration at large. And so that was very inspiring to me, and that was very inspiring to many other Indians who would not otherwise follow space updates as keenly as we would. Uh, so if I take the same thing and apply it to South Korea, who are about to have their first lunar orbiter with excellent set of instruments. One of them is from NASA, which is ShadowCam, and ShadowCam is the most sensitive camera we have ever sent to the moon. So it will be like about at least 200 times more sensitive than LRO's best, which is amazing to begin with. So, so when those discoveries start coming in and the South Korea's lunar orbiter starts contributing to the global repository of knowledge, and the people there would associate with the mission better, I can like that atmosphere is worth creating, no matter the scale of the mission. So I think that's yeah, that's another important element that I think it's very nice in the in our global return to the moon, not just the human landing part.
Um, and not everybody's excited about us going back to the moon. Some people are like, why are we sending astronauts to the moon whenever we have all these problems here on Earth? Poverty, global climate change, war,
Right.
etc. How do you think or talk about that?
So usually I try to tackle it in the sense that, first I try to tell them about the benefits that space exploration has already gotten us. And these days, it's not as simple as saying, communication technology is in part accelerated due to space exploration and so on and so forth, because all of them, the new generation, especially Gen Z, they are born in a very different era where they naturally take certain things for granted, which we also did for our own time in our own ways. So for them, saying that the benefits of space exploration have been these many things is not enough. For them, they need to connect to something like, okay, if I'm booking an Uber and it is coming to pick me up and it is dropping me at my destination, then I tell them about GPS and how it is facilitating that and many other services as one of the backbones of that infrastructure. And that is when they start to realize the value of investing in space from a applications point of view. At the same time, being in India, I have one interesting angle that most people do not have, I feel, out in the Western world is the Indian Space Research Organization is popular in India because of the missions like Chandrayaan and Mangalyaan and so on. So Indians are really proud of their space agency, and so that is my clue. So what I do is, not many people know that most of ISRO's budget is actually directed towards Earth observation satellites and related programs. Like a very, very, very small fraction of it is for deep space exploration and planetary exploration. Like even far less, the percentage is far less than what NASA does, for example. So I tell them that ISRO's Earth observation capabilities were developed from the ground up to support the building of the nation, and that is literally true. Like that was the reason for founding ISRO. It was not planetary exploration, and so ISRO satellites help us help they help fishers do their fishing, and they help agriculture. In agriculture, they help in city planning, modern city planning, and so on. So those are the kinds of examples that I try to give people when saying, why we should continue investing in space exploration. But the other thing I also try to say is, I try to question them back instead of answering them because they are already, uh, they're already cynical in some ways, many of them, right? So if someone is cynical, you can't really give them direct answers and expect them to, be satisfied with those. So the other way is I try to question them, what do you think is the value of art? Why do we even invest in art? Why do we buy paintings? I mean, at the end of the day, it's just some colors on a board. And so when I question them back, then they start to answer, okay, no, but art is something which is deeper to our existence and things like that. So then I take their answer and try to wrap it in terms of space exploration, where curiosity is our guiding light. For like, we should explore Mars simply because we should, not because it's going to give us a ton of technology. Like, that can be a side benefit of it or something like that, but that should not stop us from exploring Mars for itself, right? Or any other body for that matter. So that's the kind of things that I try occasionally. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Because resources are plenty, but at the end of the day, it's also depends on the person and how open they are to exploring the very idea that it can be fruitful. And there's of course the percentage of amount we put in space exploration anyway, but somehow that doesn't seem to strike because people don't think economics in terms of economics often, right?
But I mean, art is interesting. I haven't used that example before. I have to keep that in mind. But another one that comes to mind is sports. Seeing a group of people hit a ball with a racket versus kicking it with their foot versus hitting it with a bat. The
Mm.
only reason any of those are valuable is because people are interested in it. And
So
and so, um, if we could create a society that was naturally curious and
mm,
naturally interested in exploring things, the value would be self-evident.
mm,
I was just
right.
wondering if you have some ideas on how we create such a society.
Well, unfortunately, I don't, other than instilling a sense of unknown via, writing is the medium that I know. So I try to, tell people about what have we found on these worlds, what are the questions that are remaining, and if somehow that interests them, then uh, that sense of curiosity is instilled. But one could argue that if they are reading my article in the first place, they're already curious. So in that context, I'm not really solving anything from that perspective. So unfortunately, I don't think I have a good answer to this, other than saying that this also again is a systemic issue. So it's down to the very system to do that, not just people, individual professionals, but it's down to the system, the education system, the teachers, the communicators, the policy makers, and so on and so forth. But you mentioned the example of sports, right? That's another thing that I tell people about, where in a different context, where so Indians love cricket a lot, and cricket is not only played here in every street and every corner in every society, but it's also something people watch all the time here as a sport. And there's lots of money involved in a sport like cricket, just like there's lots of money involved in football slash soccer. So, in fact, so when those are consumed by people for entertainment just fine. It's never questioned, right? When a soccer player is bought by some league for some millions of dollars, nobody questions the value of that because everybody inherently just likes watching that. And so they don't really think about those aspects. So when I put those numbers in comparison with space missions, I'm like, see, this is the value of one player for one league for one season of this team, and compare this to this mission which took 5 years to build for approximately the same amount and has given you like so many scientific insights and so on. And that is when, like, basically comparison is something that has been more effective compared to directly giving answers. So Yeah.
No, that's true. You have to kind of like wait for the light bulbs to go off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, so where do you see humanity 200 years from now?
Hopefully a type 1 civilization, I hope. But honestly, it depends a lot on, like, I even though I write Moon Monday from an inspirational perspective, partly, but just getting excited about these things, fundamentally, I'm also dystopian, because certain things about uh, the nature of humans haven't changed evolutionarily speaking, and that is why. The ad tech industry, for example, is as huge as it is because it is exploiting all those uh, evolutionary psychological traits intrinsic to us. So in that sense, if we look at it, if the nature of our problems uh, do not change and they only come about, uh, you know, reveal themselves in at larger and larger scales as civilization progresses in terms of technology, but not in terms of the nature of conflicts that we have, then at some point you have to take a step back and think, what are we really solving? I mean, like the nature of the problems hasn't really changed much in thousands of years. So in that context, even if we, let's say, develop, you know, uh, interplanetary flight for humans, let's say, and we live in a world where we are spread across the solar system, and that would be amazing. But let's say we live in that world, and but we still have the same nature of problems that we have, except on a blown up scale. And if you, for example, the expanse is a great example of that. Um, so if we build a future like the Expanse, it's great in terms of technology, but not necessarily in terms of uh, uh, our interactions and how humans as a species are sustaining by themselves. So yeah, so I'm not sure. Like could be gloomy. Depends on how we define good government and space policies for the resources that we eventually do extract out of the moon and Mars, and the kind of economic imbalances it can bring about, and how we try to level the playing field and make it equitable for everyone. So that all matters, right? I mean, we obviously do not want a world where only one country has access to the best resources that the solar system has to offer, or effective access. Like, and that's the main thing. Like the difference between access and effective access is huge, right? So, and that's the nuance that we have traditionally missed as a society forever now. So, yeah. So, not sure. Like, but hopefully it should be. I hope it's good, but I can't still see it yet.
You mentioned you hope that one country doesn't uh, take over and take advantage of all this. And a thought popped in my head: do we even want countries in the future? Or have
Exactly.
countries served their purpose and now it's time to move on to something else?
Exactly. So, like, as long as we have sovereignty as a principle for nations, as a fundamental principle that doesn't seem to have shooken the least bit in our modern history, particularly with recent events, for example. I am not sure if we are at a stage yet where we have gotten past the concept of sovereign nations. If anything, uh, even as globalization is proliferating even more, but at the same time, we are seeing countries like India and China, for example, constantly investing in what do you call it? Self-sustaining their endeavors and being independent nations, and so is the US since forever now. Uh, so, uh, so, so at the same time we have globalization, but at the same time we have these uh, uh, very very large scale projects investing solely for the purpose of preserving the sovereignty of the nation and independence of the nation in a conflict. So it's a very it's I don't think we are there yet, unfortunately, but no.
Organizations are created for a variety of reasons. Some to explore space, some to help the poor, some to, produce cars, some to, protect people and other things. But, the number one objective of every organization that's never stated is to survive, even if it means going against the purposes by which it, was said to have been created.
True, true, true. This reminds me of the US national policy, which explicitly has the words permanent space settlement in it, but nobody likes to talk about it in as raw terms as it essentially means doing whatever it takes to survive, but nobody wants to be upfront about it for obvious reasons, and because of the colonial past and things like that. But yeah, so even if it's a negative, it's not necessarily directly that, even if the intentions are no longer that, but because of the negative connotations that could be associated to that. So
That's true. Let's see, if you could take a trip to space, would you?
yeah, I mean, why not? Why
Like,
not? Absolutely.
how far would you go? To orbit, to the moon? Would you immigrate to
I think
Mars?
I think the moon would be great. I mean, it's either the moon or somewhere in deep, deep space. So I think at that point, the choice is the moon.
Is there anything in particular you would want to do on the moon when you got there?
Well, not really. I haven't thought that far, to be honest, because I haven't really thought about going to the moon in the first place. But I think if I were to, let's say, I think it would be uh, standing near a permanently shadowed region, but outside it, and watching a sunrise, and then sort of remarking at the fact that the entire area beneath me, just beneath me, has not seen any sunlight in billions of years, and it's sort of, yeah, just that, I think. And that's the core, like that's the core essence of why we think the moon has sufficient water and other volatile resources that we could, in principle, utilize in the future to expand ourselves across the solar system. So I think just that one uh, fact about permanently shadowed regions and their very existence, and trying to capture that in a in a view or a picture or by the way of being there would be philosophically nice.
Um, I could see the appeal of that. But let's say you or one of your descendants does immigrate to Mars, and it's 200 years in the future, and it's your great, 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 I'm not sure how many greats it is, but she's really great granddaughter. Is on Mars in high school in a history class. And just like students today might write a paper about the 1820s, she's writing one about the 2020s. What is it that you hope happens this decade that is worth remembering in 200 years?
Okay, let's see. I think that would be some sort of a collective consensus at the very least, if not a form of polycentric governance with regards to how people should explore the moon across all countries. So, in including how we use its resources, because I mean it's a technical answer. I get it, but at the same time, it is a very crucial part of it. Like, my first instinct to your question was to say, relanding humans on the moon, and then that technological success never stopping, just like it stopped with Apollo. So once we land humans on the moon again, it should just continue, no matter the nation or no matter the organization. So there should not be a gap in exploring the moon with humans ever since. that point. So my first instinct was to say that in this case, Artemis 3 would be the defining moment, or the starting point of that defining moment. But then I thought about it and I figured, no, that obviously that is amazing, and obviously we want that. But in order to get that, we would need a much better consensus about what constitutes fair use of resources on the moon and fair exploration, and better than that, how can we better collaborate and have everything, have a system of governance on the moon that we have never had on Earth and we have never invented in history. And that could be the model that, is taken ahead to the solar system rather than our sovereign only principles of Earth. So I think that would be, and especially since you mentioned a history class, right? So I think that would be the key moment that I hope happens somewhere in this century, at least, if not this decade, which looks unrealistic, to be honest.
I don't know. I think Starship works, and we started having multiple flights today. I think it'd be very difficult to see what's on the other side of that kind of transformation.
True.
I mean, I think if you talk to people in the 1990s, everybody's going to have a cell phone in their hand, and they'll be able to get maps and everything. It'd be just
crazy.
Well, that's pretty much all the questions I had. I know we talked about a lot of things, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Let's see. I think I covered pretty much everything as I could remember about the moon. Yeah, I think I'll just I'll just close out with saying, particularly to students and who are interested in space, that and in the moon for that matter specifically, that there are many ways to get into space exploration, and space exploration is one of those unique fields where you have a mishmash of all sorts of fields. Like, just to create a spacecraft, you need to have people knowledgeable about mechanical engineering and thermals and software and everything in between, all sorts of engineering branches. But also at the same time, if it's a science mission, you need to have people knowing about physics, solar physics, chemistry, in some cases prebiotic chemistry, and biology, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, these are large scale projects. So like any space mission at all, like even the smallest of space missions, is large enough in its skill set required, that it basically takes a nation to run any space mission, to produce any space mission. So you need people capable of managing large groups of people, effective ways of organization. So not necessarily technical things. Then you need people like writers and communicators and podcasters and so on and so forth to get the word to people and so on. So it's a huge field, and of course people in law and space policy, obviously, like just as important, probably more. So the point is that students can come into space exploration no matter where they are in the world, because the one thing that I hear most from people here in India and is that compared to the US and ESA, the opportunities for space exploration, doing something in space exploration as they grow up, is less. That is technically true, but at the same time, the volume is not low enough. It's sufficiently high. It's a matter of a mindset also, in addition to what they know. So it's not just the degree that they have that can get them a space exploration job, but it's also the mindset. So if I'm doing and that applies to me also, like if I'm writing about space from India in independent capacity, and that's not a common profession here. So in fact, I mean, I'm not sure about this because I don't have a very thorough poll or anything, but as far as I can tell, I'm the only space writer based out of India, which is independent or not hired by an organization to write about space. So if I can do it, anyone else can do it. And I mean, I'm just a person who was interested in space. So there's nothing particularly special about what I did or what I learned. But the only thing is that there was interest in pursuing space as a domain and telling people about it. So I would say, especially to people everywhere in the world, but especially in developing countries, that you still have a lot of opportunities in space, but you can widen your scope by realizing the many facets of civilization that are required to enable space missions.
That's very true. I mean, being able to manage a team, inspire them, organize them, I mean, that's a critical skill that I don't think people have a good grasp on how to develop and, the necessity for it, but it's true. Well, Jatan, thank you so much again for participating in my project. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Keep up with the Moon Mondays. I look forward to it every Monday. And I hope you have a good evening. Or, yeah, I guess it is evening there,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. Yeah. So thank you, Nathan, for having me here. Definitely appreciate it. And I also look forward to many more of the interviews that you conduct as part of your project. And okay, so off the record,
Oh,
I just
should I
wanted to.
stop recording or?
No, you can keep the recording for yourself. That's not an issue.
Oh, I
Uh,
generally don't edit these, so I can stop the
okay,
recording.
but yeah, you can stop recording now.
Okay, done.